Hello, and thank you for tuning into this presentation, which will discuss the comparative analysis I completed on how universities teach and discuss social justice, specifically Central Michigan University compared to various institutions in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So to begin, let's talk about my basis for this comparative analysis and why I wanted to do it. So, learning, awareness, understanding, and making mindful life changes is a process that occurs when discussing social justice. So, becoming aware of social justice issues and concepts is something that takes time. One has to understand his or her own privilege that takes place in the world. And individuals need to make sure that they understand how they can make a change based on the certain privileges that they have. But understanding one's privilege is a process because often people get defensive and it takes time because for many of these students, having these discussions about social justice, equity, and equality don't take place until they reach the university setting. And at this point, their ideas that they have is based on their perceptions of their lived reality. So they might not be open or conscious of other ideas because based on the way that they were raised, their experiences that they have in their life, their upbringing, they're going to be deeply rooted in those ideals, which is perfectly acceptable because that's how every human in the world survives and learns to become an adult. But it's continuing this idea of helping students become open-minded and aware of social justice issues and concepts that really push the focus of the value of these types of discussions that take place in the classroom, hopefully at the university level. So, this mindset led to the basis for this comparative analysis, which was to determine how Ireland's higher education institutions value social justice, and in what ways do these institutions discuss and teach social justice compared to Central Michigan University. Excuse me. So right here are the questions that I asked for the Ireland interviews, and these kind of focused on, in what ways do you teach about racism? Do you teach about racism? Because, in Ireland, they're a predominantly white nation. So how often does the discussion of race come up and how is that handled? Additionally, some other questions included how does their specific institution fit regarding equity and equality for all, and in what way do we need to make changes if necessary? Also, how are social justice ideas and concepts discussed at these institutions in Ireland? Excuse me, I'm sorry. Next is going to be the questions that I asked during the Central Michigan University interview. And these questions are essentially the same as Ireland. What ideas do you focus on for students who are taking these classes? How do you have these discussions? What ways do you think Central Michigan University is following their expectations for equity and equality for all? And what changes do we need to make necessarily if we need to at all? So, that was the basis for this comparative analysis, and I'm really excited to begin to show you all what I found. So, this middle section here at the top is all of my literature that I have, and the green lines are from statements that were made during these interviews connecting to the literature, so how each kind of balances off each other and supports one another. So, to begin with the University of College Dublin interview with Marie Moran, who is a lecturer in equality studies and social justice. The first comment that I want to bring your attention to is that when I asked her, what age do you start having these discussions with students about social justice? Should it be taught at the university level when they're older, younger? Without a drop of a hat or beat, she said 10. At 10, students are willing to learn the facts, and she said that students don't need to learn the facts, but rather they need to learn to be agents of change. And this connects right here, where Tyson and Rayner noted that once students begin learning about social justice, they were open to these concepts and in fact often amazed and somewhat ashamed at their prior lack of exposure and awareness. Many immediately wanted to learn how to change their practice and become firmly dedicated to changing their roles. So going back to this first statement by Marie, if students are learning about social justice concepts and beginning to understand and be aware of these ideas, then they're going to start making those changes earlier in their life. They're going to start being dedicated to being that role model who creates that change for the individuals who are receiving prejudice and oppression, etc. The next comment I want to bring your attention to is this one right here. And she said that reading was an initial way for her to learn about social justice. With a lack of opportunity, I found my own access. And this leads to this comment right up here, that, as I previously stated, not many students have these discussions regarding social justice until they reach the university level. Taysom and Ranner also stated that many students, even practicing school leaders, had never taken an opportunity to encounter or deeply think about the concepts of democracy, social justice, or equality as it related to the overall operations of their school or student achievement, which they found through their study. So Marie had to really kind of gain that initial interest with social justice on her own. And if we begin to provide students that opportunity to think about social justice and inequality and democracy, then they're going to be able to have, once again, those conversations earlier. And we need to provide those spaces for students, for them to feel like they're in a safe space where their ideals may be challenged, because that's okay, and that's the step to gaining active members for social justice. The next concept I want to bring your attention to is this one right here. So she said that facilitated discussion is the most efficient way to learn about social justice. That with diverse classrooms that involve open-ended questions, connected with prior reading and an experienced facilitator. This connects to the top right here, where, once again, if we are providing students the opportunity to have readings and have discussions around the concepts of, once again, democracy, social justice, or equality, as it related to the overall operation of their school or student achievement, students are going to be able to connect with that. They're going to be able to connect with the prior readings, and they're going to be able to have those discussions that might be difficult, but are necessary to creating those types of mindsets for change. So one of the biggest things that I was most surprised about during my interview with Marie was when I asked her about, how do you teach social justice? Do you focus on certain isms a week? Because in a class that I had previously taken here at Central, that's how the class was taught. We learned a different ism each week, and I thought that was an extremely rewarding way to teach social justice, because then we got to see each prevalent and oppressive and stereotypical ideals behind each ism and really understand the type of struggles those individuals who experience that go through. Not fully understand what they go through, but gain that mindset of, this is where I'm privileged compared to somebody else. And so she said that in her class, they actually cover patriarchy and hierarchy. We don't focus on identity, but rather we look at how injustices interlock rather than isms or discrete effects. We focus on the global perspective and internet and intersectionality. And once she said that, it made so much sense to me as she continued to explain it, because she said, you can't start out with isms when students don't understand how those isms are put into place. And this statement has also been supported by other individuals who were interviewed during this comparative analysis. And I thought that was very interesting, because it makes sense when I think about how I learned about social justice and how I really became passionate for it and for creating that change. I don't remember learning necessarily about the hierarchy or the systems of power, but it was more so on a broader scale. So I remember, you learn about the Nazis and how that types of oppression occurred. You learn about the civil rights movement and how that type of oppression occurred within our structure of law here in the United States. And when Marie told me this, it really connected, because it allowed for me to realize, oh, that's how these isms are taking place. This is where it starts, all based on this hierarchy of power and the systems that take place, specifically, as she said, patriarchy and hierarchy. And this also connects with the literature, and it's going to be right here. So Shannon stated that for Vasquez, who was an individual she quoted in her book, globalization adds a third dimension to teaching for social justice. Progressive curriculum should arise from students' immediate community. However, that point of entry is confounded by the new and rapidly changing relationships between the global and the local. So, when we go back to Marie's comment, where she says we focus on an integrated global perspective and intersectionality, that's what's necessary to help students really understand social justice, I think, because you have to learn and see how these injustices are taken not only at a local level, but also at the global scale. You have to understand, or her comment, I guess, really helped me understand, even though Ireland may not experience racism a lot, or at least very openly, blatantly, those systems of discrimination and prejudices could still be there. So it's very important to talk about, this global perspective when looking at different isms and different hierarchies taking place regarding social justice. Another comment she made is that she hopes, or she believes, that ambassadors for equality is prominent, and she hopes that all students become ambassadors for equality. Students who come out of the program in regards to equality studies and social justice have come out with confidence in their leadership skills. And this, once again, created that idea for me that students are able to leave this program with confidence. They're able to leave this program with the idea of knowing, what steps I need to take to make a difference in the lives of those around me. And one thing that I thought was interesting is she said, ambassadors for equality is prominent, and we hope all students become ambassadors for equality. And I think this kind of indicates, a change in thought, a change in how students think about what they need to do in their own mindset and understand how knowledge works, which connects over here where Davis, Harrison, and Harrison noted that Freire argued that a fundamental change for educators is to move students from what he calls ingenious curiosity to epistemological curiosity, where understanding how knowledge is constructed and maintained empowers leaders to develop critical thinking, consciousness about the world, and agency. So Marie really strongly stated, as students go through this program of equality studies, they're creating different ways of thinking. They're switching that mindset to become ambassadors and leaders within their community and with good leadership skills. So I thought that was really important in relation to the literature. The last idea I want to note that Marie commented on is that she did a lot of self-reflection to learn about her own self, her own privileges that she has in this life, and how self-reflection is an intrinsic part of the program, which directly connects right here. Myers, Jenkins, and Need noted that the power of the systems of oppression and privilege are propelled by individual actions and behaviors. Each person has a responsibility to examine their own positionality within the system, understand where one's collude with the system, and when one can evoke change. So I thought that this statement was extremely impactful because in all reality, that's how it starts. We need to understand where we can make that change and what our place is in relation to being able to make change in society. And for Marie, she did a lot of self-reflection. So once again, she's supporting that concept of you need to think about your own identity. You need to think about your placement so then you can make change from there. Next, we're going to be looking at various institutions that we were able to visit during our time in Ireland, along with the Students' Union of Ireland and the Glen Cree Peace and Reconciliation Center, and look at how their comments equally connect to the literature. So, the Glen Cree Peace and Reconciliation Center is really focused on, once again, kind of getting rid of this discrimination and bias that is taking place between residents in Ireland and residents in Northern Ireland, because there's still a tension occurring there. And they want students to get rid of their stereotypes. And one comment they stated was that we want students to receive these stories critically, to create critical thinking when students hear these stories from IRA and loyalist groups. So what they do is they provide the opportunity for students to hear both sides of the coin. They don't just keep it, hey, we're going to only have you listen to this story and that's what you need to believe. Like, you need to believe every member of the IRA and everything they said. They don't do that. They give you both perspectives so that way you create a rounded ideal and concept of it. And I thought this was extremely impactful because in so much of today's media and every other aspect, you hear one side of the story. And to create good thinking and knowledge, we need to be able to understand that we need to hear both sides of the story before making a decision. This comment made by the Glen Cree Center for Peace and Reconciliation directly ties in to this beginning concept of the literature, which is noted right here. By expanding our view beyond individual prejudices to include mechanisms through which oppression is maintained, we practice empathy for whom we may disagree. So, at this Glen Cree at the Glen Cree Center for Peace and Reconciliation, if these students can get past those biases, and if they can continue to hear different stories, you create a type of humility that comes through that can come through when you hear other people's stories, because you can relate, because at the basis level, we're all human beings, and we can all connect with the struggles that individuals go through at either side of the coin. So with their process that they're trying to do at this center, it really goes back to this idea of we practice empathy for those with whom we may disagree when our view goes beyond our individual prejudices. The next comment that I wanted to say is that when I was discussing during one of our meetings at Queen's University, the individual said that there's not really a connection for university students and collaborative partnerships to work together for primary and secondary education. So let me explain this a little bit further. When we went to this Queen's University interview, which is located in Northern Ireland, a part of me just thought back to, here in the United States, we have a great opportunity for students to be able to have experiences with mentoring and to have internships to incorporate themselves into what they want their future careers to be. And I just thought, if you want to create a change among students in Northern Ireland and Ireland who may be attending Queen's University, I feel like you should be able to provide the opportunity for more students to get involved in these collaborative partnerships that are trying so hard to make a difference in the lives of students at that primary and secondary educational level, which would be our elementary, middle, and high school here in the United States. And so I just think that this is something definitely that I would like to look into further, is to understand more of that relationship between those community partnerships, because if you can get students involved in these community partnerships more, where you clearly have programs that can help those students get involved and make a change and kind of understand how this process works for creating these collaborative partnerships, that's going to make more of an impact, in my opinion. So I think with future research, which I will get to here in a little bit, that's definitely something to look into, to understand what they can do to get more students involved, because at each institution that I went to and with each group that we visited, every place kept saying, the students just don't seem as interested in the universities in Ireland and Northern Ireland. They're not really active, which is kind of a cause of concern for many of the individuals that we interviewed, or that I interviewed. So I just think, maybe their media tactics aren't as strong pushing for the students, or maybe they need to think of different creative ways to get those students involved in wanting to make a change with potentially those programs there in Northern Ireland. And for me, that thought connected to the literature right here, where, let me find it really quick. Where with awareness comes responsibility, for it is through our external actions, practices, and behaviors, and our internal mindsets, beliefs, and understandings that we can genuinely live and embody a commitment to diversity. So if these students are having the opportunity to become aware of what's going on in the world, if they're able to be aware of the opportunities that are available for them to make a difference regarding social justice within their community, then that's when they're going to start taking those practices and understanding and embodying a commitment to diversity, because they're going to have the opportunity to go out and do things. So that really connects with that statement of, we need to get those students involved. And how do we get them involved? We need to get them aware of what's going on throughout the society and make it a point. That's not something that these injustices that are taking place and these biases can't just be pushed to the side. So the next thing I wanted to note is this one right here. The higher education authorities noted that mentoring is a way for students to get involved with social justice and cultural awareness, leading to wider community engagement. So the higher education authority in Ireland really stated, we want students to get involved. We want them to have mentoring opportunities, kind of like internships here in the United States. And I was all about this. I fully agree that this is what needs to happen, but I think that Ireland in a way kind of needs to continue to push this a little bit more, because students, as numerous places stated, they're just more relaxed. They're not as integrated as a lot of people would like to see in these types of mentoring programs. So to get students involved with social justice and cultural awareness, they need to create mentoring opportunities and really get those students out there in Ireland, as the higher education authority said, which connects right here to the literature, where students identified coursework in the study, by Miranda Radcliffe Cooper and Ickenbrenners, found that students identified coursework and field-based experiences, specific assignments, and class activities and interactions with faculty and peers as important training components for understanding urban schools and socially just practice. So if you give the students the opportunity to go out and experience these things, it's gonna help benefit them. It's gonna help them see the value to what they're learning through these social justice discussions. Another concept that the Glencree Peace and Reconciliation Center noted was that how we value the dialogue process. And this ties in right again to the top research here, where we said students need to have that opportunity to think deeply about the concepts of democracy, social justice, and equity. So if you value an open dialogue process in your discussions and in your classroom teachings regarding social justice, that's going to help incorporate change among students, because then people are able to get their mindsets out. They're able to just let loose all the words that they feel that they need to say, and then be able to understand and learn different perspectives, which is extremely valuable. And the last note that I want to point out for the Glencree Center for Peace and Reconciliation is they said that they have a program called the Glencree Young Peace Builders, where they get individuals from Northern Ireland, the North, and the South of Ireland, along with migrants, between the ages of 18 to 23. The focus is on leadership for peace building, where a dialogue process develops and people talk about identity, leadership skills, history, and a focus on the future. Once again, this ties in right here, where awareness emerged as a particularly critical component for the development of cultural competency, including self-awareness and awareness of others. So through this program that the Glencree Center for Peace and Reconciliation provides, they're giving students that opportunity to talk about their identity, to talk about leadership skills, history, and how they're going to make that change for the future. And this awareness is what's going to create cultural competency. This awareness of what's going on in my own life, how my life is being impacted by these factors. Being aware of that is what's going to make this change and help students feel that they can make a change for good towards social justice. So next, we are going to focus on the interviews from Queen's University and Trinity College. So beginning with Queen's University, I interviewed Neil Jarman, who is a research fellow and advisor of Studies and Disabilities Advisor. So the first point that he made is he said that our discussions of social justice at the university start off with an ism focus. The starting point is a narrow range of isms, which have a wider range of knowledge of people knowing them. So example, racism is better understood than homophobia. So this goes back to this idea of globalization, because with a progressive curriculum, from a progressive curriculum, it should arise from students' immediate community. However, that point of entry is confounded by the new and rapidly changing relationships between the global and the local. So for many of these students in Ireland, they might have a better understanding, or in Northern Ireland, they might have a better understanding of racism, but less with something such as homophobia, because it's just not discussed as much. It might not be such a widespread issue as like clearly racism here in the United States is still an issue. We need to progress to help people stop being racist towards one another. So his comment about how the starting point starts with specific isms, it's like a building scale. So it's a good, efficient way for students to learn about different types of isms that are taking place throughout the local and the global community. So you start with what people know. You talk about those discrimination and those biases, and then you keep building and adding each level of a different ism, so to speak, as throughout the educational process. And I think that's really efficient because like if you don't understand a certain ism, as it were, that can be really confusing. But if you start with ones that you know and have a general consensus of, and then keep gaining more knowledge on each one week after week, as I did in my Leadership for Social Justice class, I think that helps create more awareness and understanding of those factors. So the other thing that Neil said, which once again connected with Marie Moran, is he said, you will lose people who don't buy into social justice at the university level, which is why you need to get to people to understand social justice issues earlier, before they are filtered out through our education system and students realize they don't care. Once again, this connects back to the research over here, because if you don't have these discussions, students aren't going to, they don't have the opportunity to encounter or think deeply about the concepts of democracy and social justice and equality. Once again, with each educational level, you're just being reinserted of those same ideas and concepts that you know to be true as you have grown up and been raised. So we need to start this conversation sooner. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I gained from these interviews is that's what needs to happen. We need to kind of create programs or maybe classroom settings where these discussions can take place, but it's kind of a hard balance because, teachers have a lot to do at the primary and secondary education level, and it can be difficult to integrate one more thing where such big concepts and ideas to get students to understand these concepts, it can be a little bit of a challenge. So he said that, Neil Jarman said that at Queen's University, their student union is big with the student body at promoting social justice and awareness. And this was really rewarding to hear after, you kind of heard at various places that that the students are a little bit less active. They more have a sit back idea, but it's good to hear that the student union is really big with the student body promoting social justice and awareness. And this connects right up here with the idea that institutional members, and specifically students, should be involved in the development and assessment of diversity initiatives, whatever form they take. So this comment that was made by Diaz from 2011, he is really making the statement that we need to get students involved, because that's when they understand how it's going to make a difference. That's when they're going to get, hey, I'm making a change and I have proof to show how this impacted me in my life. And Neil Jarman, for him to say, the student union is really focusing on promoting social justice awareness, it's really rewarding, because those students are trying to make an impact on more students' lives in Northern Ireland. So the last comment that I want to bring your attention to is when Neil Jarman said, regarding social justice, it's something you have to be aware of over a long period of time with what you're doing and how you're acting. And this ties in to, let me find it really quick for you. Which ties in right here. So, with awareness comes responsibility. It is through our external actions, practices, and behaviors and understandings that we can generally live and embody a commitment to diversity. So, we need to be fully aware of the social justice issues that are occurring in our world. We need to understand our privileges that individuals sparingly may or may not have. And we need to look at how we're acting, how we are creating a change for those surrounding us. And we have to be consciously aware of that. And I think that his statement really brought home the point of the value to understanding how we can make that change and how we need to be socially and cognitively aware of what we are doing and how our lives are making a difference in the lives of others simply based on any privileges that we may have, which once again also connects to the literature where we need to get students to, again, have that epistemological curiosity, where understanding how knowledge is constructed and maintained empowers learning to develop critical thinking. When students can critically think, that's when they're going to make the change to be aware of their actions and how it's going to affect people over a period of time. So next we're going to focus on Trinity College, which was the interview with Peter Stone. He noted that there are segments in Trinity where the university teaches about equality from a historical viewpoint. If you look at the history of Ireland and the history of Britain, you learn a lot about imperialism, a main system of how injustices began. So this ties in to, one second, let me refine this one. Once again, okay, so this once again will tie in with Fierre's argument that students need to get past, they need to know how knowledge is constructed to develop critical thinking, consciousness about the world, and agency. And also, it also connects, which I didn't even put on here, but it connects to the top that we need to expand our view beyond, we need to expand our view beyond individual prejudices to include mechanisms through which oppression is maintained. We practice empathy for whom we may disagree. So when we expand our view beyond those individual prejudices, when we decide to learn about the history of how prejudices are put into place, that's when we can have epistemological curiosity, where we understand how the knowledge is constructed, how people established. Okay, so let me rephrase. When we learn about the history, as Peter Stone stated, when you look at the history and how these structures of injustices came into place, that's how you begin to learn. Having that critical thinking to think about how these structures were put into place, that's when you really begin to process, this is how these injustices took place, this is how they started. And you're able to see and understand what caused people to go to these lengths to think that this was right to create further injustices for other people and lack of equality and equity. Peter Stone also noted that self-reflection was an inevitable part of the process for him, which is one of the reasons why it's important when students can get into these conversations at the university level. Once again, we go back up here. He's stating that each person has to understand and examine their own positionality within the system, understand where one's colluded with the system and where one can evoke change. So self-reflection, as he said, inevitable. People have to do it. Otherwise, you're not really going to be able to fully understand and believe and become aware and open-minded of issues surrounding social justice. He also said that self-reflection takes time and effort to get good at it. Finding the time for that finding time the time for self-reflection past the university is extremely hard, and having that space for self-reflection is critically important, which goes back up to this, where awareness emerged as a particularly critical component for the development of cultural competency. And students, once again, need to find their positionality within the system and understand where they can evoke change. So you need to have the space to think about yourself and your positionality within the system. And finding the time for that, as he said, is extremely hard past the university, which is why it is so incredibly important that these institutions are discussing awareness and helping create awareness among the student body. The last comment he stated was that student activism is here on campus, and a lot are issue-driven. Compared to American universities, activism is more subdued. So once again, Peter Stone kind of was saying, those students aren't as active as what he would like to see, as was kind of the general consensus for the majority of the interviews that we had. But he did talk about how the student activism is on campus and how it's issue-driven. Once again, going back to this concept that students who identified coursework and field-based experiments, scientific specific assignments and class activities, and interaction with faculty and peers are important training components for understanding urban schools and a socially just practice. So giving the students the opportunity to, again, make those changes, that's what's going to cause the impact. Letting students experience it, that's going to make the change. Next, we're going to look at the comparison with Anne Hornack, who was the individual I interviewed from Central Michigan University. So some of the comments that she made that relate to not only the literature, but to Ireland, the people from Ireland, their responses, was that when learning and discussing social justice, we should learn about it, then experience it to solidify learning, baseline, and then practice and keep doing that. College campuses are famous for a one and done, and we isolate it to a certain time or month when we should be focusing on it for an entire time. So her comment about how we need to learn about it goes back to one second. Okay, so it goes back once again to experiencing it. Students need to experience social justice, and then as they continue to learn about it, the experience helps solidify that learning. And I found that to be extremely true in terms of what I've recalled from my classes that I've taken on my undergraduate, now in my graduate course of study. When I was in a communication class, if I learned about a certain concept of, how to handle conflict, and I learned those skills, I then experienced it in certain scenarios, and my recollection of that was much stronger, and I still remember it today compared to some things you just memorize and forget. So as Anne's saying, when we learn and discuss social justice, we need to learn about it and then experience it. And this once again relates right to these concepts that institutional members, and specifically students, should be involved in the development and assessment of diversity initiatives, whatever form they take. So these students need to get involved and experience what they learn. She also said that the isms come out of the way we set our structures. We have racism because people don't understand and never question the norms of it. You have to understand the structure. You can't get rid of isms without redesigning the structure. So again, this ties in right to the top here of how one needs to understand the systems of power that create inequality. So this connects with Diaz 2011, who said that initiatives must start from a point of awareness concerning social, economic, and political contradictions. So for those diversity initiatives to take place, people need to be aware of the way these structures have been set up and why these structures are set up and the systems of power that have created them, which I thought was really interesting. The last comment that I want to make that Anne really connected to was she said, we need more classes to have these discussions. Students are hungry for it. And this led to kind of like my main points of the literature that I completed for the self-reflection, that students need to value self-reflection. They need to have a hunger for knowledge because they do have a hunger for knowledge, as Anne stated, which is this concept right here by Davis, Harrison, and Harrison, which also found that another important factor is connecting social justice to the social construction of knowledge, is empowering learners to begin cultivating their own voices and envisioning their own responsibilities to the production of knowledge. Once students learn and accept the facts and initial concepts of social justice, a positive hunger can ensue. So once these students begin to have these discussions, they want to learn more. I know for me personally, once I learned different things about different cultures and ethnicities, I wanted to learn more. I was interested in it. If we can create and ignite a passion for students, even at an early age, such as 10, which both Anne and Marie, along with the other individuals, noted during my interviews, then that's going to start that change so soon. And it's going to create such a positive impact and help people become aware of social justice issues so they're not learning all of this knowledge once they hit university. So the other thing I wanted to focus on during this comparative analysis were these institutions following their mission statements regarding equity and equality for all. So if we look at this, the University of College Dublin their focus is to advance knowledge, to pursue truth, and to foster learning in an atmosphere of discovery, creativity, and innovation, drawing out the best in each student and contributing to the social, cultural, and economic life of Ireland to the wider world. SAMU's mission statement was that they are committed to the pursuit of knowledge, wisdom, discovery, and creativity. They provide student-centered education and foster personal and intellectual growth to prepare students for productive careers, meaningful lives, and responsible citizenship in global society. Queen's University focuses on supporting outstanding students and staff, working in world-class facilities, and conducting leading-edge education and research focused on the needs of society. And Trinity College also provides a liberal environment where independence is thought is highly valued, and where all are encouraged to achieve their full potential. They will encompass a more diverse student community, undertake research at the frontiers of disciplines, and fearlessly engage in actions that advance the cause of a pluralistic, just, and sustainable society. So each of these institutions within their mission statements talk about how valuable it is to create a rounded student, to create that developed student who values what is just and right in society. And I think that's extremely important. These institutions at a missional level, they're incorporating it. They understand the value that comes with teaching students about social justice. And they understand the value of what we need to create in students so that way they can make a change, a positive change for the community. One thing I did happen to pick up on from each of these institutions, not just one, is that they kept saying at the institutional level, it's just a little bit of a disconnect. Like the universities try to do things to create equity and equality for all regarding social justice, but they're still lagging a little bit. So there is room for growth at each of these university sectors of making sure, as Anne Hornack said, that the programs that are taking place, such as during Martin Luther King Jr. Month, and during that week, it's not just a one and done. Like it's not a 1 week, oh cool, Martin Luther King Jr., all I did was great, and then you forget about it for the rest of the school year. We need to incorporate these ideals, these concepts, and what the people in our past did for social justice, along with what people in the future currently are doing for social justice. So these institutions still need to ensure that, they're going past the lip service of saying, oh, we're going to do this. They need to continue to incorporate that change. And by having these discussions in their university classrooms surrounding social justice and teaching students about these principles and to find a passion for social justice to create equity and equality for all, that's what's going to make the difference. So let's go to my final findings and thoughts. So this study created paths for my own brain to interpret and analyze the process of my social justice development. So reflecting on my own development, I don't really remember learning about the hierarchical structure of social justice and inequalities, but I remember little snippets of history. So I would learn, let's say about the Holocaust or about the Rwandan genocide, and I understand those systems of power and how those biases are set into place. And by learning about that history in that way, when I had my class leadership for social justice here at SAMU, then I was able to incorporate, oh my gosh, this is how the isms attach to these power and hierarchical structures. So I loved learning that all of these institutions are connecting on that level of we need to teach about these hierarchies and then dive into the isms so that way students can get a good well-rounded focus, which is also supported by the literature that I found for this project, that students need to understand that hierarchy. They need to understand the history before really diving into those isms. I also learned that each professor noted the value of self-reflection. And I had this same viewpoint. I never really understood how much of an impact a self-reflection can take. It really makes a big impact to learning about myself, learning about my own privileges and how I can make a difference based on my privileges here in the world, and how I need to be aware of what I have compared to what others might not have. So I really value the fact that, this literature kept supporting, self-reflection, identity, talks about identity. And the fact that these professors at an international level, along with here in the United States, mainly to Central Michigan University, are all realizing that value to it, because that's a really big important step that I know I never would have thought of had I not joined this master's program here at CMU in higher education administration. So this analysis completed over this course highlighted how valuable understanding the process to teaching, learning, and discussing and seeing a need for change in our society through social justice truly is, and to make leaders that will impact the world with a stance on equality and equity for all. Steps involving self-reflection need to be taken, as found through the research and interviews noted in this comparative analysis. And as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, there's the facet that for many of these institutions, they kind of have a one and done week, as I say with the Martin Luther King Jr. week here at CMU, that we need to continue to push through and help educate students to realize that these concepts aren't just a one and done. We need to continue to learn about this history and embrace it and learn about what individuals have gone through, what stories they have to share. We need to hear both sides of those coins to help create a change and understanding that we need to have a passion for social justice and creating equality and equity for everybody. So this kind of created some questions. What increases these times of activism, and why does it decrease so rapidly? What can higher education professionals do to create a change in this facet of student life at a personal and an institutional level? So what can institutions do, and professors and even students do, to help students find a passion for wanting to speak out on social justice issues and seeing the need for change? And specifically for Ireland and Northern Ireland, how can these institutions increase integrated programs for the students to have numerous opportunities in areas surrounding justice? Because from what I kind of gained from the interviews that I asked, they have opportunities, but I don't know if they're really pushed as strongly as what, here at CMU we have our Leadership Institute, and for the students that get involved, they have plenty of opportunities, and that's pretty well heard throughout all of campus. So what can those institutions do? Potentially another future thing that I might want to study as I continue my studies here at CMU. So, learning creates pathways to expand understanding and awareness. Teaching and discussing social justice is a valued aspect of the curriculum, and higher education professionals must continue to look at how teaching and discussing social justice is constructed in order to increase the opportunity for student interaction on campus. This analysis that I completed has provided insight to the power increased awareness and activism can have on a campus community and society, along with supporting the basic principles of effectively teaching and discussing social justice that has been backed by the interviews and the literature. Change comes with open-mindedness and awareness, and with these factors creating change, our higher education institutions, our society, and our world can impactfully unify in the stand for social justice to demand and create environments for equality and equity for every person. And the one thing that I really wanted to bring your attention to really quick is that if we, as higher education professionals and professionals throughout the world, can increase student awareness and activism on campus, that will regulate into society. That's how we're going to make our change. We need to start having these discussions with students, potentially even at an earlier level than university. We need to create these principles for these students to understand, because it creates such a world that they might not even have been aware of. And I think that's something that, at the university level, we need to discuss a little bit more often, and we really need to integrate it into our university settings and standards.